Tonight's presenter, Mark Blumenthal, is the founder and executive director of the ABC, and also the editor and publisher of HerbalGram. But the accolades don't stop there. Most recently, he was named Whole Foods Magazine's Person of the Year in 2023.
All right.
He is regarded as a premier expert in botanicals, and here's what Whole Foods Magazine had to say about him. Research, education, quality, transparency. These are essential to the healthy growth of the natural products industry. And we owe our thanks to the pioneers who have had the vision, passion, and integrity to demand that we always strive for excellence in the service of the consumer. Chief among those leaders is Mark Blumenthal for the significant impact he has had on the industry. And for that, they recognized him as the Whole Food Magazine's Person of the Year.
Wow.
That was written on April Fool's Day, by the way.
Mark has also appeared on over 600 radio and TV shows. He's written over 600 articles and book chapters for many major publications. He's been a leader in the concern for more rational regulations of the herbal and natural product manufacturing and education on plant-based medicines for over 40 years. As we made plans to open the exhibition Floramania, we thought Mark Blumenthal would be a perfect fit, exploring the medicinal benefits of flowers. I was excited and grateful when I suggested a webinar, and he said, why not? I just come in person. And so he traveled from Austin, Texas to be with us here tonight. And so again, I really want to thank you for that, Mark.
After this is over, their wish is a webinar.
Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mark Blumenthal.
Thank you, Patricia. Okay, so y'all can hear me now, okay, in the back, and hopefully, if anybody has a problem later on, if I start getting softer in my older age during this long presentation, just go like this or, wave me down or whatever. So I flew up here on my frequent flyer and I just found this cartoon just a few weeks ago. So I figured just in time, right? And I want to give a shout out to Patricia. It took me over here for the ramen restaurant. Anybody know the ramen restaurant over here? So I found this to acknowledge the the popularity of ramen numerals. That's a new thing that they're doing at the ramen restaurant. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of groaners coming up. I was in the restaurant. I asked for, it's a Japanese restaurant. I asked for some matcha tea. Do they have matcha tea? No, they have green tea, but they don't have matcha tea. But anybody ever been to Machu Picchu? Anybody been? Yeah. Artie, of course, Professor Eschbaum. Okay, I know that a lot of you have been waiting a long time for this, so. This is it. And this is what you've been waiting for. And it's going to go all downhill from here. I promise. I promise. So it's been a big concern to me for a long time how little people really know about plants and about botany. It's like exactly. And many of us are aging. We're not getting old, we're aging. There's a difference, hopefully. Well, so Patricia mentioned that we're a science organization. We deal with scientific research on herbs and medicinal plants. We like to gather, curate, summarize information on herbs. A lot of this is based on consumer demand and consumer interest on natural medicine and how can consumers avoid the high costs of conventional medicine. We don't call it traditional medicine anymore. We own traditional medicine. Herbs are the traditional medicine.
Correct.
The other stuff, which is valuable and useful and appropriate in its right place, is conventional medicine. It's life-saving. If I get hit by a car, I want to go to the ER. I'll take the herbs next week. Take me to the ER today, So but there's a lot of issues about the safety of conventional medicine. People have a lot of issues around the affordability or lack of affordability of conventional medicine. And I love to deal with the cartoons. I do whole presentations at medical conferences, by the way, on what's going on in the culture based solely on cartoons, because they're mirrors of what's going on. The cartoonist page, the comics page, is probably the most intelligent place per square inch of any place in any newspaper, especially the sports page. But anyway, never mind. Oh, I know. Okay. People still do that? Yeah, just to get warmed up here. Exactly. You have to. Okay. And I want you to know that this was the only thing I could get that fit my vegetarian, vegan, Texas lifestyle. Oh, well. Okay. We're in a library. Let's give on medicinal plants. This is the largest library on herbal medicine and medicinal plants in the entire Western Hemisphere. Right here. Right here. This is it. You're it. This is it. This is ground zero for herbal medicine education in the Western Hemisphere, and one of the most important places in the world. And this is an article we did in HerbalGram in 1992 on the Badiana's manuscript from 1552, which is essentially the Aztec herbal, written in Nahuatl and Latin by Spanish botanists, with Juan Badiano, who was the first generation after the conquest, who learned both the uses of medicinal plants that the Spanish had, but also the traditional indigenous Nahuatl Aztec uses of the plants. This book is an amazing book. It was returned by the Pope in 1990 to Mexico in time for the 500th anniversary of the Columbus's discovery. Quick shout out to John Irby Lloyd, the amazing pharmacist, herbal magician, incredible human being, who was the founder of the Lloyd Library, of course. And in 1990, we asked Rebecca Perry, who was then the librarian at the Lloyd, to write what was essentially a 2-page article on the library for HerbalGram, so we could share with our herbal community brothers and sisters about the Lloyd, because many of our herbal brothers and sisters didn't know about the Lloyd back then. But there are many herbalists I've known who consider John Irby Lloyd to be the lodestone, the central energy, the magnet, of herbal medicine knowledge in North America, because it was John Irby Lloyd who brought so many of the herbs and medicinal plants into medicine through the eclectic doctors. Many of you know this already, and it's been told by many people more articulately than I can, but I'm just giving homage here while I'm here standing in holy ground. Founders of ABC, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. James A. Duke, is on the cover of this issue of the magazine right over my heart here. Dr. Norman R. Farnsworth, whose collection is here at the library, and Professor Barrow E. Tyler of Purdue University. For 20 years, he was the dean of the School of Pharmacy there, and 5 years was the provost and the executive vice president of Purdue University. And yesterday, when I was visiting at P&G, I met a pharmacist who had gotten his pharmacy degree at Purdue, and he had never heard of Professor Tyler, who had been there for 20 years and was the lead author of the textbook, 5 editions of the textbook on pharmacognosy, which is medicinal plants and modern drugs that come from medicinal plants. And here's a pharmacist who just graduated from that school just a few years ago and didn't know about Professor Tyler. So there's a lot of work to be done historically to help retain and maintain and project the legacy, the history of the people who came before us, whose knowledge and wisdom they shared so that we could enjoy our lives and make better lives for others through natural medicine. And I want to give a shout out to my dear friend and colleague, the late, great Stephen Foster, author, self-taught botanist, incredible photographer, author of over 20 books, and was a person who helped reintroduce echinacea into the herbal community with his first book on echinacea back in the 1980s. the first book written on echinacea since the 1920s, since John Irving Lloyd's book on echinacea. There was a 50 or 60-year period. There was nothing on echinacea until Stephen Foster started writing about it. Most of the photos in this presentation are photos of mine and or Stephen Foster's. And I want to acknowledge that we're here to talk about flowers, flora, based on the Greek god, the Latin goddess of flora, the goddess of nature. And these are angiosperms from a botanical perspective, seeds that are coated in a vessel, as opposed to gymnosperms, which are naked gyms. And we could have a conversation about going to the gymnasium, where men used to go in Greek times and wrestle naked, hence the name gymnasium. So they were naked wrestlers, which was the way it was back then. They don't do that on TV these days. Angiosperms, flowering plants, are about 80% of all of our plants, according to some data. My name, Blumenthal, is a German word, Blumenthal, which means flower valley. And when I was in the herb business in the 70s and 80s in Austin, I had a wholesale herb company. I had herbs and spices and essential oils under the trademark name of Flower Valley. So I own the trademark for herbs and spices under Flower Valley. I come from a long line of herbalists. Back then, the name wasn't always Blumenthal. It was Neanderthal. And this is a photo from my father's. My father came over from the old country. And I know why you're laughing. And somebody had an Aggie pharmacist once in my group. And I'm from Texas, and we talk about the Aggies, you know, A&M people. And they said they didn't have color photography back then. We colorized it just for this. Here's a quick shout out to one of my favorite and one of my most formative people. Back in the day when I was living in New Mexico on a commune near Taos back in 1970 to 72, off the grid, I read this book called The Immense Journey by Lauren Isley. And he had a essay on how flowers change the world, which is, if you haven't read this, it's incredible. I encourage you to read it. It's a little dated now, written in the 1950s. The first edition was written in 1951 and then 57 when the book came out. He said that flowering plants became part of the biological precondition in the evolutionary cycle of mammals because they created all these seeds and fruits and concentrated foods that these small rodents and mammals first needed to be able to survive. So flowering plants became part of the evolution. I know that I have to use the word evolution here in the word as a theory of evolution, I understand. Because I'm from Texas, I have to say theory of evolution. State law, I think. Coming to a state near you. So flowering plants, you know, last 130 million years or more. Actually, they came after some of the first mammals, we think, but nevertheless, they are part of what is necessary for the concentrated food sources. So we did a cover story in HerbalGram back in 1991, how flowers changed the world. Pardon?
What is that flower? I just photographed it today.
We just saw it at.
Fritillaria. And that's a Chinese herb as well.
Look, it's in Washington Park.
Wow.
Yeah.
We just saw it. We were like, what is that?
Thank you. Very kind of you. All right. So generous. People are so generous up here. Let's be, what are the odds that you would have that queued up on your phone?
Because I've never seen it. I know, I've never seen it before. No.
Are you psychic?
We just.
Wow, that was
Fritillaria?
fritillaria. I think it's a fritillaria. Botanist, is your botanist going to confirm that? What is it?
Says fritillaria right on.
Is that it? Does. Red, that was good. Red, right?
Red, yeah. Oh, red,
Yeah,
yeah,
in fact,
Oh, that's Latin name. What's?
Well, Latin name. Are there other names? I mean, we're supposed to, we have real botanists here. Is anybody here a member of the Lloyd Library, by the way? Are you all members? Good for you. Thank you for supporting the Lloyd. Anybody here a professional botanist? I got two. Got any more? All right, so we, you know, So we have put flowers on our covers for a variety of reasons. We love flowers and flowering plants. We're going to talk about some of them in a moment. Now, lady slipper is not an herb that is using the flower. It's the root that has been used traditionally as a natural sedative. But it's a native orchid. And the problem with that is they're all endangered. And they shouldn't be extirpated or pulled out of the ground to use for commercial purposes, because we have plenty of other herbs that we can use that are sedatives, nervines, tranquilizers, etc., central nervous system depressants. And we were successful. We wrote in 1988 and then in 2021 how successful we were in getting the herb industry to stop selling lady slipper root, which was being dug in forests around here in Appalachia, etc., because it was traditionally used as a medicinal herb in formulations when it wasn't necessary because other herbs were equally good substitutes. So we were able to get this to stop. We got the industry to stop doing it. And the responsible elements of the industry, you can't buy lady slipper today, and you shouldn't be able to, as you can as a plant that you can plant, a nursery plant. You can't buy it as a commodity, the dried root for use as a capsule, tablet, or extract. So we do deep dive articles in HerbalGram. You'll see that in some of the sample issue you can take home with you. A lot of our articles go up to 15,000 words, including references. Our stuff is intentionally referenced. Our stuff is intensely and extensively peer-reviewed by experts, not just two reviewers, often like you see in some of the medical and pharmacy journals, sometimes 5, 6, 8, 10 reviewers, depending on the situation. Professor Tyler encouraged me back in the 90s to translate what the German government had done on reviewing medicinal plants sold in pharmacies and medicinal plant products sold in pharmacies for their safety and efficacy, where the government put together this Commission E, a special commission that was composed of physicians, pharmacists, botanists, medical doctors, and people with expertise in medicinal plants and pharmacognosy to act as an advisory commission to the equivalent of the German FDA. And they came out with these monographs, which were basically designed as package inserts for herbal drug products sold in German pharmacies to explain what the government approved use or uses for that plant is, what the side effects are, what the dosage is, what the definition of it is. In other words, guidelines for pharmacists and consumers on how to use herbal medicines as drugs in pharmacies. Now, in the 1990s, we were dealing with a lot of problems with the FDA, and we eventually passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, but we didn't have a rational system for regulating herbs in the United States and how to label them, because any labeling that these herbs might have any beneficial use from a health point of view was considered an unapproved drug by the FDA, and they were going to take it off the market. And to get a drug approved back then cost like $50 million. Who could afford $50 million to get, parsley approved or something for a breath freshener, or chamomile for upset stomach? You couldn't do that. So we got these herbs approved as dietary supplements, which are foods, not drugs. And we can only make very limited claims for them. And I'm going to show you some of the claims for some of the flowering items that are approved in Europe and what some of the research is. But I'm going to mention the Commission E sometimes, because the Commission E is the book that I was the senior editor of. We sold over 20,000 copies of it. It's a 715-page book. I don't take credit for it. I can take credit for having had it translated and databased and produced, and it's on our website, at herbalgram.org. But it's the German government and the German people that get credit for this, because they did the work. We just translated and databased it, which is interesting because nobody else in Europe had done that, ironically. So these are the flowers that are approved as herbal medicines, as drugs, not as dietary supplements in Germany by Commission E from the year 1978 to the year 1995, when the Commission E was operating. The ones that are bold are the ones I'm going to talk about tonight, and a few others. Starting with this one, arnica. Now, I'm going to show you some plants, and some of this stuff, you already know it, and you may know more about it than I do, and I'd love to know what you know, but we're just going to go through these very quickly. Arnica, and here is from the ABC website, we have a database called HerbalMed Pro. What we've done is we've taken the National Library of Medicine's PubMed database, all the abstracts for the different scientific papers that are published in the clinical trials, and we've organized it in a very rational manner. So if you can see up here, clinical trials for arnica 58. I'm sorry I don't have my clicker here, unless somebody has a. Does anybody have a cat at home, and do you have a laser? So what I'm going to be focusing on here, if you can read it, is where it says clinical trials. There's all these other kinds of literature here, but the clinical trial, evidence for efficacy in humans, 58 means there's 58 published clinical trials available, the abstracts for which are available on arnica on the PubMed database, which is the National Library of Medicine. And the commissionee, when it reviewed this in 1984, so in the 1970s to the 1980s, they reviewed it and they came up with these uses for arnica, which is mainly used externally for contusions and bruises. And many of you have used arnica. Usually it's a homeopathic preparation, but it's for bruises and joint pain, sometimes for shock, etc., and also for sore throat. Sometimes they can, depending on the type of preparation used, although arnica is not recommended usually for internal use. But anyway, I'm just showing you what the commission needs, these are the government approved uses of arnica preparations as medicine, not as a dietary ingredient or dietary supplement, which is our situation over here. And here's an herb clip, another ABC thing that we started back in 1992, where we do 2 or 3 page summaries of clinical literature and other publications in the scientific literature. We have over 9,500 of these, and every 2 weeks we publish 16 more of them. So we have a whole lot of data. We're really information junkies, if you will, here at the American Botanical Council. We're about science. We're about communicating science. We're about rational understanding and interpretation of the science. Here's conservation and sustainability. This is not about medicinal use, but this is about the conservation and sustainable collection and harvesting of arnica. And what's the status now? Because we have a whole program, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, just on sustainability and about making sure that the herbs that we get that are sold in Whole Foods or sold in your local health food store or at the CVS pharmacy, or they're sold online and they're in teas and in capsules and extracts and cosmetics, all that herbal material. Let's make sure that all that stuff is sustainably harvested and sustainably sourced so that there's future generations can have access to them, even if we have to cultivate them, which is happening more and more. However, with some problems, with some herbs, and when they get popular, there's a situation where people get greedy. And sometimes they take shortcuts and they'll buy something that looks like the right thing, but really isn't the right thing. And it's sold as the right thing, but it's not really, and it's fraud. And it happens all the time. And it happens all over the world. And it's been happening for thousands of years. People have cheated in the market. I'll show you later a program we've done that's called the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program. And we've published bulletins on notifying and alerting industry members what's being done in the area of fraud in certain herbs, so that the responsible members of the industry that are making products, in this case arnica, know what to look for and how to test so that they can make sure they're getting the real thing and not what somebody is selling to them, which is not. And it's not just the herb market. Versace purses, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, whatever. There's wine, there's olive oil, there's fish that are mislabeled in restaurants. There's all kinds of marketing going on all around us, all over the world. It's been going on for hundreds and thousands of years. People cheat. And if we want to get herbal medicines that are authentic and safe and effective and are given to help our lives, improve our lives with increasing the quality of our life with natural medicine, we have to ensure that the people making these products know how to play fair and play right and know when they're getting gamed or how to protect themselves against the fraudulent producers of stuff that's fraudulent, phony, adulterated. Calendula, another flower. Commission E, inflammation of the oral and pharyngeal, the throat. So you can gargle with it. You can drink a tea and gargle with it for inflammation, and it's also used for poorly healing wounds. This is the Commission E approved use from 1986. Now here's a new one, the European Medicines Agency. Used to be called the European Medicines Evaluation Agency, and it's like a pan-European FDA. So, because all Europe has incorporated through the European Union, all these countries in Western Europe, the European Union, and they are now approving herbal medicines based on the traditional historical data and the modern scientific research. And these are the approved uses for calendula preparations as medicines in the European Union. I'm not going to read this to you because you can read it faster than I can say it. I'm just saying that I'm trying to give you some information here from authoritative sources internationally that have recognized the data, looking at the totality of the information that's available, in this case on calendula, and saying that these kinds of claims on products are allowable as medicine. This flower, this beautiful flower, full of all these carotenoids, which are yummy. So if you look at our HerbalMed Pro database, there's 29 clinical trials as of June of 2017. We have not kept up with calendula because it hasn't been adopted by somebody. And but so I will show you when I show you these HerbalMed Pro, most of them, not all of them, are up to date within last month, but not all of them are. So when they aren't up to date, when I say there's 29 clinical trials, there have probably been some more published in the last 6 or 7 years. We have not kept up that particular record. And here's one on oral calendula for second-degree burns. And this is one of our herb clips. And this was just published a few months ago, based on a study that was published 2023 in January last year. So this is latest information, calendula for burns. Now, one of my favorite herbs, and I promise you, by the way, if anybody's going to ask, you don't have to wait to the question and answer. No, I never exhaled. Actually, I am mentioned in a book, the first biography on Bill Clinton. I'm mentioned twice as to whether or not he ever inhaled or not, because I worked with Clinton on the McGovern campaign in '72. I ran a 5-state radio news campaign, and Clinton came down from Yale. And he was like the state coordinator, and we were after the election was over, and we got creamed, of course, and McGovern really lost big time. We won Washington D.C. and Massachusetts, like 16 electoral votes or 17, something like that. Nixon got everything. So we were at this wrap party at the end of the election, about 3 or 4 days later at Bob Armstrong's ranch, and there was a fire going, and people, about 30 of us around the fire, and somebody had a guitar, and somebody had a long neck beer, and it's a kumbaya moment, and most of us never see each other again, except for Clinton, who kept in touch with a lot of people. And there was a joint going around, and I remember twice seeing Clinton take it from the person next to him and turn around and hand it to the person to the right. I don't know, it was Hillary maybe, and she was there too, and I'm going, what do you mean, man? It's like, we just got creamed. I can't believe you. Anyway, so this was back, and I just moved back from the commune, a couple of months before that to work for McGovern. And it was just one of those moments. And so this guy in '92, when this guy was doing this article, this book from the Washington Post on the Clinton's life, he said, I heard that you worked with Clinton, from somebody at the campaign, and I just have one question for you. I could see it coming. He said, I understand you were the hippie on the commune. I said, yeah. And he said, well, did he ever see him? So I said, no, he didn't. I didn't see him. So I'm quoted in that book as not having seen him. So you would think that he would have sent me, hey, way to go, Mark. Thank you. Next time you're in Washington, Lincoln bedroom one night, No, I didn't. But okay. So, but it's become an important part of our culture. And, fortunately for you all, you have a rational system here in Ohio to some extent, because you've legalized it to some extent. So good for you. We've had several covers where we're dealing with cannabis. And I mentioned cannabis as a flower here because it's mainly the leaf and the flower, but that has been used traditionally, but it's also the flower that they're focusing on mostly these days. And this is, again, 2019 incomplete, 50 clinical trials, and since then a lot more have come out, and we need to update that, but we haven't updated it. But there's a lot of activity, as many of you know, in the research on cannabis. here's a clinical trial from Normal. It's done a great job. It's a great organization, Normal, national organization to reform marijuana laws. They do great work. Again, it's see, we never became like an advocate for marijuana and for medical cannabis per se, because we've got 1,000 other herbs to deal with. We've got ginkgo and ginseng and garlic and St. John's wort and all these other herbs that we deal with on a daily basis. We didn't want to get pigeonholed into a corner as being like the marijuana advocates. And if we didn't do that, at the same time, we treated marijuana and cannabis as just one other medicinal plant, because to us, that's what it is. It's just another medicinal plant. It's compelling, it's dramatic, it's got a lot of melodrama around it, unfortunately, because of the draconian regulatory history that it has. But at the same time, we have all these other plants to enjoy and engage with and do research on and do education on. So so we try to stay very plant centric. So here's the map showing what's going on. You all don't need to see this, and in Ohio, you all have it available. So anybody not get this, so I can change it, so I can go to the next slide? Anybody? If I'm going too fast for anybody, let me know. All right.
You didn't mention that the degree was from the Fancy Pants Medical School.
That's right. Yeah, you have to read yeah, you're sitting in front here, Red, so you can see the small type. Yeah. Okay. So a reason I put that pain dermatologist thing is because the first one of the first uses of cannabis that's been recognized as an approved medical uses in some state is chronic and severe pain, and many people use CBD and or other forms of cannabis for relieving of pain. And none of this is surprising. And this is from WebMD. I mean, can you imagine 10, 20 years ago trying to find this information on WebMD? No way. So there's progress because the research is compelling, that it's useful. So okay, let's talk chamomile. We're going to go quickly here. Peter Rabbit Ale, the carrots and Farmer McGregor's carrot patch. He came home with an upset tummy. He went to bed, and Mrs. Rabbit brings him chamomile tea, right?
That's right.
So we know that we have documentation in the literature that chamomile tea works for upset stomach. It's in the literature. We all grew up with this. It's cultural. This is cultural stuff. This is cultural stuff. So, we all know this. But there's also research on chamomile beyond going for our carminative upset stomach bar. Look at this, 151 clinical trials as of last month in the database on the National Library of Medicine for the HerbalGram Pro record on that. 151 human clinical trials and clinical review articles. Astonishing. And then if you were to click, if you were on my website and you click on clinical trial on chamomile, you would go to the next page and you would find the 151 trials summarized in one sentence summaries with a hot link to the actual abstract on the PubMed database. And we do this for 275 herbs, and we've got hundreds of thousands of these studies boiled down to one sentence for a quick review. And then, of course, you can't do it justice in one sentence, but the idea is to be able to go there and be able to see whether this is something you want to look at or not, if you're doing research or writing an article or writing a book or whatever. Anxiety, etc. There's all kinds of benefits for chamomile that are central nervous system related, not just gastronomical. And here's a combination for IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, where chamomile is one of 5 or 4 ingredients. So I'm just showing the kind of research that's going on. I don't have time to do it all. There's so much going on here. So what about the flu? A lot of people get flu, but they take echinacea for cold or flu. They take echinacea to prevent cold or flu. We love echinacea. Echinacea to us is an important plant. We love it. And look, 141 clinical papers on echinacea on PubMed as of last month. So there's a lot going. There's a lot of there. And back in 1988, when I started ABC, we decided to make echinacea our logo for our organization for these reasons, which you can read because it made a lot of sense. Native American plant. There's sustainability issues. It was a favorite plant of the Plains Indians. There's a lot of ethnobotany. There's modern research. Easy to grow. It's beautiful. And of course, people use more than just echinacea flower. It's mainly the root and sometimes the leaf or the fresh pressed juice of the leaf in medicinally. But I'm putting it here because it's such a beautiful flower. And some echinacea preparations, root preparations and leaf preparations also have the fresh pressed juice of the fresh flower in there as well, depending on what company, what herbalist is making what product, just FYI. And this is an echinacea stained glass window at ABC that was made for us by my dear friend, the late Dr. Dennis Wang, who was one of the North America's greatest natural product chemists and who left us a few years ago. And he made that plant for that logo for us. Now, speaking of flu, elder, and got a big bump during COVID. Not a lot of clinical trials on elder, only 31 as of last month. But the trials seem to look in the direction and go to the direction of increasing immune system function to help reduce colds and flu. But it's not the elderberry that we're concerned about in this conversation. It's the elder flower, because they're two separate herbal drugs. Elderberry is one, but the elder flower has been used traditionally in herbal medicine to help break sweat as a diaphoretic. When you take it, elderberry hot tea to help break a fever. And here it is. The European Medicines Agency is saying that they recognize traditional historical uses. There's data supporting its use. Now, there's a problem with elderberry, and that's not the flower, but the elderberry, because during COVID, a lot of people started buying elderberry because they were going to try to help reduce their chances of getting COVID or reduce the effects of COVID because they were going to have beneficial immune system functions. And so we were concerned because there's not enough elderberry out there because it's on a tree. It takes 5 or 6 years for an elderberry tree from the time you plant it to get a fruiting tree. It takes time. So you just can't plant it this year and harvest it in September. Doesn't work that way. So if you've got an increased spike in demand happening right now, you're not going to be able to meet that demand with more supply for a number of years as far as increasing the supply base. So what happened is we suspected, and it started happening, people were selling stuff called elderberry. Guess what? It wasn't elderberry. Some of it was Chinese sambucus from a different species, not the same European elderberry that we know is the literature is based on. And some of it is other, who knows what. But the fact is there was adulteration and fraud, and we published the first paper in the scientific journal and a peer-reviewed paper in history on elderberry. Adulteration. So you got all right, so you can see where I'm going now. We're going to go to heart. Now, this is not an area of self-medication. I repeat, this is not an area of self-medication. You can self-medicate for a cold or flu. You don't self-medicate for heart disease. You have a cardiologist. Right? Cardiologist.
Right.
So what happens is hawthorn berries, and then later the leaf and flower extract became popular in Europe in the 1800s and 1900s for cardiac. And the data that commissionee reviewed in 1980s and 1990s found that hawthorn flower and leaf extract had the highest amount of OPCs, oligomeric proanthocyanidins, compared to the berries, and that became an official recognition for stage 2 of heart disease or congestive heart failure, according to the New York Heart Association's 4 stages of heart problems that are dealt with, called congestive heart failure. Now, you don't self-medicate. Cardiologists should know about this. They should be taught about this. They generally are not, because we have a medical system that is not very open to receiving this information, and there's a cultural issue that we've been trying to break through for a number of years. Clinical trials on Crataegus, hawthorn 55, as of May of 17. There's been a few more since then. I would say that any cardiologist who is practicing medicine with people with early stage heart disease, that hawthorn flower leaf extract is probably worth considering, depending on other variables that you can't talk about. I mean, I can't talk about because I'm not a physician, I'm not a trained health professional. I can only talk about the possibility, and it has to be on a person by person basis, but people should know about this. European Medicines Agency, they relaxed the claim, relieves symptoms of temporary heart complaints related to nervousness such as palpitations. Hawthorn extract, the flower and leaf extract, increases the contractility of the heart muscle, increases ejection fraction, to put it into cardiac terms. Let's go to one of my favorite plants, hibiscus. Everybody likes hibiscus tea. It helps lower temperature, according to the people in North Africa and temperate areas. It also lowers blood pressure. Now, remember that hawthorn, and by the way, this is a gem, Patricia. I published this in 1981. This is the magazine I published before HerbalGram. This is when I was doing the Herb Trade Association, before I started ABC and HerbalGram and all that. So this is hibiscus is not a flower. They call it hibiscus flowers, but it's the calyx. It's the outer covering of the flower before it opens up. The calyx. That is the medicinal part of hawthorn. Of hibiscus. The calyx. And there's 72 clinical trials on hibiscus in the literature and clinical trial papers. Here's a bunch of them right here. You can just see them. Can't read them. Don't want to read them. But just letting you know there's a lot of there. Here's a systematic review and meta-analysis. This is a study that takes published clinical trials and reviews them from an overview. If, depending on which of those trials meet the inclusion criteria for the review, not all 72 would be in there. They would say, oh, we want trials on people with certain conditions or certain dosage levels or certain whatever. But the point is that they do reviews of reviews sometimes, and reviews with clinical trials, which has more compelling evidence of the benefit. Blood pressure, hawthorn berry, I keep saying hawthorn, hibiscus, the H is there. Hibiscus lowers blood pressure in people who have higher blood pressure that's not based on metabolic syndrome, i.e. pre-diabetes. So let's talk about hops. One of my friends hops is in the Cannabaceae family, although they try to move it into Moraceae for political reasons, the mulberry family, but it really is in the Cannabaceae family, which is the marijuana family, the cannabis family. And hops, a friend of mine used to take the strobiles, these hop strobiles, and take the humulin out of that, with his little hairs that contain these psychoactive compounds, and he would smoke it and called it hop sheesh. That's not a new product idea. I got my friend Amy Rowe here from P&G, not a product. So these are strobiles. They're like pine cones. They're they're like fluorescences, but they're not the same as flowers per se. But in the trade, they're called hops flowers. Just like hibiscus, it's called hibiscus flowers, but they're not. Hibiscus are calyces. These are strobiles. It's a little bit of a botany anatomy conversation. 70 papers on hops. There's all kinds of central nervous system benefits for hops. And the German commissioning, mood disorders, restlessness, anxiety, and sleep disorders, among other types of things. For hops, no surprise. We've known about that for a long time. Hops is a great herb, and it's very safe to use, and people use it, and it's a flower-like substance, so I included it in my medicinal flowers, and even have hops baths. Some of these herbs, like lavender and hops, you can actually bathe in them. The way to do it is use them, put them in an old sock, put them into the hot water, in the bathtub where the hot water comes. They don't want to put a bunch of hops in the bathtub, clog up your drain. You put it, use an old sock, and that's like a giant tea bag, right? Okay, so relief of mild symptoms of mental stress and to aid sleep, according to the European Medicines Agency. I just mentioned lavender, so let's move on there. Lavender is extremely popular, and it's also one of the most adulterated herbs as far as essential oils is concerned, known to be able to promote sleep, a mild relaxing sedative. the lavender fragrance, the lavender essential oil, now being used in hospitals and clinics because it has an anxiolytic effect. People feel more relaxed. Great for hospital rooms, etc. Not that you should ever have to be in one. But this is the Commission E use, and in balneotherapy, they have a whole commission B, just for bath therapy. And they review the different evidence for using herbs in the bath. It's a very interesting, because remember, the skin is the biggest organ of elimination, and it can be an organ of absorption, because once you start sweating in that hot water, you can start absorbing the chemicals in the bath. You absorb it into your body, and it goes directly in your bloodstream. It doesn't go through your GI tract, so it doesn't go through first pass metabolism and get broken down by the liver. It goes right in your bloodstream, right to the brain. Lavender, look at that, 55 clinical trials as of March. And again, lavender essential oil, mild symptoms of mental stress and exhaustion and to aid sleep, according to the European Medicines Agency. Again, this is a European-oriented model because they're ahead of us in being able to recognize the historical uses and the modern science and how that can be used to make mild claims for products that people use as medicines. We can't do that over here. We have to be very careful about our dietary supplements. And I mentioned lavender oil is adulterated often or subject to adulteration, and we published a bulletin on that so that industry is aware of that and they know how to determine what's what. Passion flower, I'm going to go quickly here. It's a BDZ, benzodiazepine, partial agonist. Passion flower has a central nervous system depressing activity, and so it's used as a sedative or anticonvulsant, antispasmodic, traditionally, combined with other herbs like chamomile and sometimes lemon balm, etc., lavender, etc. And here's the passion flower Commission E approved use. This is the government approved use, but the Commission E isn't doing this anymore because Germany is part of the EU. So a lot of their Commission E monograph approved uses have kind of upgraded into the European Medicines Agency, but they have, I don't want to confuse you. The point simply is, over there is more official recognition of the value of herbs as medicines than we have in the US, where they are sold as dietary supplements, a class of food, not drug, and therefore the claims that are made for them have to be limited to how they affect the structure or function of the body. But in the United States, you can't say how it can treat or mitigate or prevent or a disease. Because if you do that, then it's a drug and it's unapproved. FDA won't let you do that. So here's passion flower, mild symptoms of mental stress to aid sleep. And this is, and hopefully in some cases, maybe news you can use. Maybe it's not news, maybe it's old information you've already seen before. And maybe it'll stimulate you and inspire you to do more about how you incorporate herbs in your lifetime. That's a surprise. Does anybody not know what that is? Okay, so that's the cover of one of our HerbalGrams from Rose there. We did a whole article on rose. It's amazing. It's also a medicine in some places. And this is interesting. So this is the pharmacological activities of rose materials, rose oil, rose extract, etc., attar of rose. And you see a lot of anti-bronchial, anti-cough, sedative, relaxing effects. None of that should be surprising, but and there's clinical research on rose as well. And here's a rose review. Promising analgesic effects, pain reduction effects. And this is based on a meta-analysis of other studies. This was just published a couple of years ago. So let's look at mental states. This is my favorite here. Can you read that back there? Of course, you feel great. These things are loaded with antidepressants. This is my favorite, my Godzilla cartoon, right? I love this one. This is right. Let's talk about depression. So many people are depressed. I understand why. I mean, there's first of all, there's biochemical reasons why people get depression. It's biochemistry, and the diet and drugs may need to be changed. And people maybe are just depressed because they look at their iPhone too much, or they watch the news too much. I don't know. You know, it's saffron, the world's most expensive spice. It's these 3 pistils that they pick out there in the fields. That's the spice. 1, 2, 3. So it takes 150 flowers to make 1 gram of this stuff. 187 clinical papers published on PubMed dealing with the pharmacology, the clinical basis of saffron, primarily for depressive states, mood associated with menopause, PMS, etc. There's a whole range kind of hovering around depression, anxiety, and mood with saffron, the spice. Now, part of the good news is, and some people don't like me saying this, some of the research is not just on the extract made from the pistils, but also from the flower petals themselves, and some of the extracts made from the flower petals, which are more plentiful and therefore lower cost, have some of the same benefits as with the pistils alone. So the lower cost material is showing some benefit as well. So that bodes well for the future of saffron. And here's a systematic review for psychiatric and neurological disorders. You can read what it says here. This is our summary of it from HerbalMed Pro. But basically, that saffron had a positive effect on depression in all the systematic reviews. And again, the systematic reviews were of clinical trials, where you put them together in one pot and look at them all in a community of papers, not just one individual paper compared to another. This is our cover story on saffron. We did this in 2016, so it's been 8 years now, 7 years, and reviewing the clinical trials up to that time. And all this material, most of this material is available on the ABC website. And as you can guess, saffron is also, since it's so expensive, it's subject to adulteration. And we have published a bulletin through our program on called BAP, the Botanical Adulterant Prevention Program, to let people know about the adulteration of saffron, how to avoid it. If you're in the business and you're buying extracts to make capsules or tablets, how do you ensure you get the right stuff? Now let's talk about St. John's wort. Beautiful flower. St. John wort is mainly the leaf and the whole herb that's used to make the extract for depression. 270 clinical trials as of July 2022. There's been some more since then, so there's quite a bit of work on St. John's wort. There's a systematic review, meta-analysis showing a benefit of St. John's wort compared to a placebo, and also 17 randomized controlled trials compared to a conventional pharmaceutical drug. So now we have 18 placebo-controlled trials, and then we have reference controlled trials where the reference is the actual sertraline or the pharmaceutical drug that is most widely prescribed. So we have that. Now this is not floral per se because it's the leaf and flower both extract that's used, but it's really kind of cool that St. John's wort has so many beneficial, so much evidence to it. And yet there's a downside, because St. John's wort is known to interact with a number of drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, and they can actually reduce the serum level of these drugs and render them to be ineffective by upregulating certain enzymes. So you don't want to take St. John's wort with conventional drugs unless you're under the guidance of a pharmacist or a physician. You don't want to self-medicate with conventional pharmaceuticals. And guess what? There's adulteration going on with St. John's wort as well, and we published a bulletin on that. One of the interesting things about St. John's wort is the flower, those yellow flowers. If you take that little yellow flower and put it in your finger and squeeze it, a red little oil comes out that's in the flower. It's red, and when you put it and make a tincture out of it, the tincture turns red because it's all got this compound in it that's red. But you don't see it in the yellow flower until you squeeze it, and that's used for a number of burns, scratches, sunburn, etc. It's mainly used St. John's wort tincture, flower tincture used by herbalists externally. So just for the next few minutes, I just want to, in closing, I want to share a little about ABC and about HerbalGram and the last 40 years. These are a number of our different kinds of publications and programs. We've been around for 35 years, but HerbalGram was started 40 years ago. We have HerbalGram. HerbalGram is quarterly, peer-reviewed. HerbalGram is our monthly newsletter that goes out to our members. Herbal News and Events is our weekly newsletter that goes out to anybody who wants it. All you have to do is come to our herbalgram.org website, sign up and register. You don't have to pay any money. It's free. And you can get this Herbal News and Events newsletter that has webinars, seminars, conferences, symposia, etc., and a bunch of articles from the last week in the world's media, both industry media and consumer media, scientific media, just 8 or 10 articles about what's been going on with herbal stuff and natural medicine, etc. And I say symposia here because we have all kinds of conferences and events. The word symposia, by the way, comes from the Greek, sim, meaning together, posia, from potus, Greek, to drink, like potable water, because the philosophers sat around and drank that lousy wine they probably had back then. And then as they got high, they started philosophizing, and that became a symposium. So I just want to say that I always like symposiums. A lot of symposiums I go to speak at don't give you any wine. You have to, it's at least until the evening. But that's the true meaning of symposium, by the way. It's fun to look at the words. Herb Clip, I mentioned to you before, we have these over 9,000 of these summaries of the herbal literature from the scientific literature that come out every 2 weeks. So we have 16 of those. HerbMed Pro, the database, I showed that to you already. That's something we do that is very unique and robust. And I want to acknowledge these companies that have recently adopted some of the herbs on HerbMed Pro. This is not an ad. It's just mainly an acknowledgement to these companies who have forked over the funding so that we can pay compilers to look at the PubMed database every month to see if which herbs that are adopted and what new data has come out and been published so that we can update our records for our public, etc. Books, we're in a library. So I'll tell you a little bit about our books. We published the commissioning monographs in 1988 and followed up with the expanded commissioning monograph in 2000. And then in 2003, we published these monographs here for healthcare professionals. And this book was actually certified for continuing medical education for nurses, pharmacists, physicians, naturopaths, no lawyers. We use those in the animal experiments. Anyway, rational phytotherapy. I had the honor of being invited to update this book that Professor Tyler was the English editor of, the late Professor Tyler, one of my heroes, from the gentleman from Purdue University. And so I'm now it's been 10 years old now, or no, 2004 we did. So now it's time for an update for that book. This is the major book used in German, in the German version, in German medical and pharmacy schools on herbal medicine, what they call rational phytotherapy. Use of medicinal plants based on the published scientific and clinical literature, not just on folklore. We did this book on morphology of medicinal plants with Mobot, and coming soon, our newest book coming. This is a groaner. This is a sleeper. You're not. I guarantee you, you are not going to want this book. This is a book about the different solvents used in making botanical extracts, used in foods, drugs, food colorings, extracts, cosmetics, etc. And we're doing this as a service to industry so they know what the solvents are, what the chemistry is, what the pharmacology, toxicology is, what the sustainability issues are, and et cetera, what the greenness part needs to be. We supply a lot of information to industry, to academia, to health professionals, to government agencies, to consumers. We're a science-based herbal medicine research and education organization. We published the first ever article on the sustainability of herbs in the coming climate change issue. Will it affect medicinal plants? We asked in 2009 on the cover. In 2019, 10 years later, the entire issue was devoted to this subject. And we don't call it climate change anymore. We call it what it is, climate crisis, and it's compelling and it's definitive. We know what's happening. These plants cannot scurry up the mountain when it starts getting warmer. They don't have legs. They cannot move up to higher and lower temperatures. They're at risk. There's other plants that are at seacoast levels with rising sea levels. They're at risk. The mangroves, the mangrove forests are at risk. So we partnered with Ann Armbrecht at the Sustainable Herbs Program, and for 5.5 years or so, we have run this website and this project, this program called the Sustainable Herbs Program, the leading program in the industry. We've just published our second version of our toolkit. Anybody can download this toolkit. It's free access. It's 84 pages of incredible information. It's designed for industry, but anybody can take this information and utilize it just for your home on how to be more sustainable in the way you live, because it's got dozens and dozens of links to books, CDs, websites, special reports, white papers, all kinds of information, free access. It's totally free. Totally free. We've done over 35 webinars with over 50,000 people since the lockdown about the relationship of people and plants, the true basis of ethnobotany, people and plants. And these are the companies I gratefully acknowledge. They're the ones that helped start the Sustainable Herbs Program and fund it. And these are companies that came in later and helped fund it since we started it 5.5 years ago. So moving forward real quickly, coming soon from ABC, not ready yet, but we have Herb TV. We're going video, but not just linear. We're going video. We already have the Herb TV YouTube channel. There's already a bunch of stuff there, except for this guy here. Should say, I have to edit, that should say 50 years now. This is old stuff. Anyway, we are putting together, we're curating and collating content from other sources, reliable sources. We are producing our own videos on milk thistle, ashwagandha. These are sponsored or underwritten by various companies. Sulforaphane, the primary chemopreventive ingredient in broccoli, saw palmetto, and tongkat ali, which is a male enhancement herb root from Malaysia. These are just the first 5 videos. These are 8 to 12 minutes there. And so I'm almost finished. Just want to give you a preview of what's coming. Yeah, we have to move quickly, I know, because who knows, right? How much time do we really have? So let's talk about quality. Let's talk about quality. An important part of the conversation, real quickly. And I mentioned several times in my presentation. Now, this was in Parade magazine 20 years ago in a Sunday supplement. So this is family rated, Patricia. I mean, Parade magazine did it. So I mentioned numerous times that some of the herbs that I mentioned are subject to adulteration and fraud. Another one of my family photo albums. There's always going to be a rotten apple in the barrel. At least one. The problem is there's lots of barrels. More than one for each herb, maybe. Who knows? So we started 14 years ago the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program to try to show the responsible members of the herbal community how to avoid purchasing adulterated material that's fraudulent and selling it on to their customers. And the first thing we published was this article by Stephen Foster, free access. Anybody can read this. It's fascinating history of the adulteration of herbs, spices, botanical drugs for the last 2,000 years since Greco-Roman times. We've documented it. And the point of that is that this adulteration and fraud is not just something that is part of the modern herbal industry. It's been going on for centuries and millennia, and it happens because people cheat. It's unfortunate. In the last 2 years, we have published these new documents in BAP alone. These are peer-reviewed by extensive by academics, by industry experts and government experts in the United States and internationally. And in some cases, we have 20, 25, 30 peer reviewers for one document. It takes us months to go through it. They have the aura of official documentation, but there's nothing official. We're just a nonprofit organization trying to do the best we can with the resources that we have. And we're grateful for the opportunity to do it. These are some of the bulletins that we've published in the 14-year history. So far, we have published 85 peer-reviewed publications, all of which are freely accessible to anybody in the world to download along. They just have to register. And we have companies that are actually using our publications to set their specifications, their technical specifications for the ingredients that they buy. And in using our information, they find out that, wait a minute, we have to revise this specification for St. John's wort or for lavender or for saffron, because Mark's group has just published this stuff and we didn't know, we have to change it. And what happens is they end up changing their suppliers sometimes because they have been buying stuff that has been substandard, but they didn't know it until they read our stuff. And which means that we're having an impact. And it's having an impact on literally millions of capsules and tablets of these herbs that are going into our country's marketplace and internationally as well. We're having an impact. We know it. We've talked to the responsible people. We set up a program that if you find that something is adulterated to the point where it cannot be lawfully remediated, burn it, don't return it. Don't send it back to the person who sold it to you, because guess what's going to happen? They're going to sell it to somebody else. Big secret. If they sold it to you the first time and didn't test it right, they're going to sell it to somebody else. Burn it, don't return it. And we have a program on that. Then we have some of the top companies and the top organizations that are supporting this, because it's not just enough to show people what's going on. We have to help them get rid of some of this stuff if they have that. We've received a number of awards for our work. We're grateful for that. The most recent one of them is the Industry Initiative of the Year Award from nutriingredients.org or .com for this Burn It, Don't Return It program. I was very honored in January to be named one of the 30 people who shaped the natural products industry. I think Patricia may have mentioned that when she introduced me. I appreciate that. I think that she also mentioned that I was lucky enough to get the people who at Whole Foods Magazine, no relation to Whole Foods Market, by the way, my good friends at Whole Foods Magazine, who obviously are suffering from judgment deficiency syndrome, but they did it. And what's next is I've been somebody just recently sent me this, and I'm very grateful for this, but I don't know. So be sure before you leave, we're going to take some questions and answers in a minute. Be sure to pick up a copy of HerbalGram if you want. I want to acknowledge the wonderful people that make ABC, which are the employees, the board of directors, the advisory board, including Amy Rowe here from P&G, who's here in the audience, and Dr. Hardy Eschbaugh over here, who's been on our advisory board for over 60 or 70 years, I think, 25, 30 years. ABC is an organization that's international. We have members in 80 countries. We are dedicated to increasing the quality and the quantity of reliable, responsible information about herbs and medicinal plants. We operate out of a house that was built in 1851 in Austin, Texas, on 2.5 acres. I want to thank you for your time and attention. I want to thank you, Patricia, for including me. Here's our Texas. This is what it looks like in Texas today. It's 80 degrees and our blue bonnets. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll be able to take your calls.
About the azaleas in March.
The azaleas, yes, but the azaleas are more in Baton Rouge. These are these. Yeah, but we're blue bonnet people.
I know that.
Yeah. Good. You got to go to Louisiana again. Yes, sir.
Is there something you can say about people that are allergic to certain herbs? Like for me, hops, I get congested. If I like the hops in beer, certain beers will cause me to be congested.
Okay, so his question, I don't know if you heard him, his question, what about allergies? And he's allergic to hops, so he drinks beer instead of wine. And no, sorry. So do you get reaction to beer too? Certain like IPA, like an IPA that's heavily hop
Yeah,
beers?
I'll get really congested.
Yeah, I don't, I really don't know how to respond to that. I mean, it's obviously a very personal and it may be idiosyncratic situation. But I don't know how if you already have an allergy, how you would mitigate that, other than to drink light beer, which I don't think it's not real beer. I mean, they should never put that stuff out there. I'm a real beer. My dad's German, as you can see, and so I drink real beer. But no, yes, ma'am.
Drink cider.
ABC looked at studies that support the null hypothesis when you're looking at research.
Studies that support the null hypothesis. Well, we review what's been published. We don't stimulate or do our own clinical research, obviously, just to be clear. We are doing what's called secondary research, not the primary research. So we're reporting on what's been published in the literature. And so when there's null hypothesis related information, we will include that in our summary and review, but it depends on what the paper is that we're reviewing, because we're a small organization. We're about 19 full-time people, and we're all full-time people. Well, not all of us. 19 full-time employees and about 30 or 35 contractors. So we're over 50 people that are getting a check from ABC every month or based on project or whatever. But what we do is we review and report on what other people are doing and help correlate. And in some cases, we help stimulate that. And we are co-authors and authors of numbers of papers that are in the clinical literature, and also in the scientific literature dealing with our adulteration and fraud programs. But we don't do clinical research.
And how do you recruit your peer reviewers?
Oh, good question. How do we recruit peer reviewers? We make them members of our advisory board. And we look at who's published certain papers in that subject area, and we go to Google Scholar or PubMed, and we look for known experts or people who publish in that area. Plus, we know a lot of people in the game. I mean, we have a advisory board over 130 people internationally. So we have quite a robust advisory board, and they make recommendations for specific reviewers on specific topics as well. Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, this is Professor Hardy Eschbaugh and his wife Barbara of Miami University of Ohio. And Dr. Eschbaugh is a botanist and an ethnobotanist.
Was.
Is.
Director every time.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention about what you did, Mark, which I think was phenomenal, is the 10 or 12 years in which we had the pharmacy and the rainforest workshops that many pharmacists went and took and had their eyes open in a way they never imagined down in Peru.
Thank you for that, Hardy, because you were there many times. Let me just share with Hardy, if y'all didn't hear him in the back, did y'all hear him? So Dr. Eschbaugh, Professor Eschbaugh, said, what I didn't mention that from 1994 till around 2006, or about 10 or 12 years, we would take pharmacists and physicians to the Peruvian rainforest to look at medicinal plants and food plants, because it wasn't just medicine, but it was foods, and plants that modern drugs are made from, like I want to say not the scopolamine, what kind of, ever had a middle moment? Yeah, we're not old enough for senior moments yet. We have middle moments in our house.
Some of the
pre-surgical muscle relaxant. Any physicians here? Tuberculare. Thank you. Very good. D-tuberculare actually is and it comes from the curare plant. And the reason it's called tuberculare is because they take the arrows, the darts, and they blow them through blowguns, the tube, and they blow them on sloths, and then they fall out of the trees. Thank you. So it's called D-tuberculare, which is a pre-surgical muscle relaxant that was developed into a pharmaceutical drug from observation of how the indigenous people in the Amazon use this plant. They made an extract out of it, and then they put it on these little thorn-like little hypodermic type things where they were not hollow, and they would blow them. And they were good. They would shoot, we tried shooting them. Anyway, we took the doctors and the pharmacist down there. It was called Pharmacy from the Rainforest. And they got 12 hours of CE and CME credit for going with us for 10 days. Some of them went on to Machu Picchu or matcha peaches, for the extension. But they would learn about from Jim Duke and Dr. Eschbaugh and others, Mary Hardy and a number of herbalists that we took down there. They would learn about the medicinal plants, also from a native shaman, Don Antonio Montero Pisco, who also has passed, by the way, a few years ago. And we would do an ayahuasca ceremony. Here, you know what ayahuasca is? It's the medicinal, the brew from the ayahuasca plant that also includes other psychoactive materials. It contains dimethyltryptamine in it. And so it's very psychoactive, and it's becoming very popular on the underground right now. And it's being popular in being researched right now. But there was, so ayahuasca refers to the vine, and it means vine of the soul, ayahuasca, vine of the soul. There's a reason for this, because you have a soul experience when you take this stuff. And then the ayahuasca also refers to the concoction, the brew of the ayahuasca in the big kettle or cauldron with the other plants in it. And we would show them this, and we would not do the ayahuasca ceremony as part of our pharmacy accredited thing. But, you know, I happen to know that while I was, you know, with Jim in the bar, playing guitar, drinking whiskey, pisco sours, there were some of those pharmacists who slipped Don Antonio $50 and they went off, and, you know, the next morning you could see them, you know, floating by, whatever. But yeah, we would take, but it opened, as Dr. Eschbaugh mentioned, it opened up the eyes of many pharmacists and physicians because they were in situ. They were there in the Amazon. They weren't just reading something about this on a text in a textbook or in an article. This is before we started this before the World Wide Web. We couldn't go on the web and do this, you know, before webinars and stuff like that. But it was like some people told me they had life-changing experiences just by being there in situ and seeing and you know, the diversity, the botanical diversity in the Amazon is astonishing. I think north of the Rio Grande, we have 25,000 vascular plants between here and the Arctic Circle. Is that about right? 25,000 vascular plants. Down there, you have that many plants, probably vascular plants, in like a 100-mile radius. I mean, or more. It's astonishing, the diversity down there. So one of the high points of my career has been with ABC with Dr. James Duke. And we had people like Dr. Eschbaugh and Dr. Mary Hardy and other people going down there, showing people how indigenous cultures have evolved by learning how to use the plants that are around them and learning how to use the plants that they trade for, you know, from other peoples and further inward in the jungle or whatever. There's a whole story right there. I mean, and let me tell you one other thing. Somebody said, well, how'd you come up with, you know, American Botanical Council name? I came up, when I started ABC, I said, you know, the name for this organization should be as easy to remember as ABC. American Botanical Committee, Commission, Consortium, Confederation, Council. And that's how I got the name. And I still get people come up to me and say, hey, Mark, how are things at the American Botanical Society? It happens all the time. What is it about ABC you don't get? Anyway, we have time for a few more questions?
Maybe another question?
Yeah, it's only 8:20.
There have been a few studies in the last couple of years, I'm sure you know about these, that have used sequencing techniques to look at especially caplets, like nutritional caplets that are sold as nutritional supplements. I think Walmart was one of the featured places. And the studies have shown that they're heavily adulterated in many cases.
Yeah.
That sometimes contain like grass clippings or something, and none of what they say they're converted.
All right, so his question was, thank you for the question. There's been DNA sequencing, and we published the first article in the herbal industry, getting people to understand that DNA technology was coming, genetic testing, and that it's an important part of a robust quality control system. There's a number of, we've also published papers showing the limitations of DNA technology. When you test an herbal preparation under DNA, the DNA doesn't tell you if it's the root, the leaf, the flower, the cortex, because the DNA of the plant's the same throughout the plant. And in herbal medicine, the plant part is an important part. Like we talked about elderberry. Elderberry, you have elderflower, and they have different activity. So what happens is, when the earlier days was happening about 15 years ago, there were a number of research groups rushing to sequence a bunch of different plant material, and including some material that they got from Walmart and herbal capsules. And they take the capsules and they put them through a DNA machine, sequencing machine. And it was early stages. There's been evolution in DNA technology. The next generation is more than what the Sanger method, the earlier methods. Is that me? Anyway, that's my wife. Tell her I'll be home tomorrow. So what happens is they found like grass DNA for grass clippings and a lot of stuff that's extraneous to the labeled material, which is what he's talking about. And this made headlines because what happened was it looked like a bunch of the stuff that you were buying in the mainstream stores was so adulterated that it wasn't even what it claimed to be, but a bunch of hay or grass clippings or whatever. Well, it turned out that a lot of that research was coming out of one particular, not just one, but one particular place, especially at the University of Guelph. And his materials have had to be retracted because there were there were methodological flaws going on as far as what he did, and also the interpretation. It was highly misinterpreted, but the media jumped on it. You know, a story called "All the Planes Landed Safely Last Night" is not a story. But if there's a near miss or a crash, it's front page news on CNN. So whenever there was like bad news, the media would jump on it. First, the media helped build the herbal community up because back in the 90s and the 80s, we were a major source of information to the media. We helped build the herbal market. We helped create awareness of the herbal market because we were reporting on the science in a rational way to interpret the information. But what's happening is that the media likes to eat its young. It builds it up, but it's ready to tear it down because they're looking for the next story. I mean, that's true. And I'm not anti-media. I'm just talking about a dynamic that you have to recognize as it occurs. And what happens is that they were looking for information to sell a story. The pinnacle of this was in 13 years ago, now disgraced and retired. Not retired, they kicked him out. He had Eric Schneiderman. With no respect to Mr. Schneiderman, he was the Attorney General of New York. And he saw an article in the New York Times, he and his people, about what you're talking about, that turned out to be needing to be retracted, but they didn't know that at the time. So I said, well, let's go, if there's fraud in the herbal market, let's go to Walmart and Kmart or, whatever, GNC. They went to 4 major retailers and they bought a bunch of herbal capsules. Now, some of these capsules have powdered extract in them. It's very hard to tell what's going on DNA-wise with an extract because the DNA and extracts are often heated and filtered, and so it's hard to tell a DNA. If it's a powdered herb that's just been powdered and dried and put in a capsule, it's one thing. But if it's extracted, it's hard to get good DNA because it gets clipped and shipped and snipped. So Schneiderman came out with this major deal, and the New York Times was involved in a front page news above the fold, if you know what I mean by above the fold. It was there when you picked up the paper, it's right there, about these fraudulent herbal products. Well, it turned out that Schneiderman's work was based on DNA analysis that they had commissioned to a reptilian biologist working at a small university in the state of New York. And if you all know anything about genetics and DNA, I got some news for you. Plant DNA is actually more sophisticated and more complex than animal DNA is. And what happens is they had a reptilian biologist who did dinosaur and lizards and stuff like that DNA, and they gave him all this herbal and botanical stuff, and he botched it, and they came up with these negative results. But Schneiderman never did a control. That's science. Science means you control your experiment. You've got some other study going on over here with the same stuff, and you check it out to make sure that this study is validated. They never did that. It was an unbalanced study, and the New York Times went for it. They were co-conspirators in it, and these are the New York Times that's constantly dissing us with all kinds of stuff. And yet it was an unscientific study, and they had to retract that, although Schneiderman's people never published a formal apology, and the New York Times has never published a formal apology. We've written about it extensively in HerbalGram, and if you want to ever see our articles about it, and they've been peer reviewed, because it was a travesty. Because we welcome legitimate scientific research that shows whatever it shows, because that's what science is about. It has to let the chips fall wherever they fall. That's part of what it's about. But this was a hatchet job, and it really, and it cost millions. But the good news was it got people upstairs in the C-suite, the CEO, and thinking about quality where they may not have done so before. It's Scott, right?
But with the adulterants that you've mentioned that we've been dealing with for thousands of years, more tools in the toolbox is a good thing, right?
More tools in the toolbox is a good thing, absolutely.
So I guess my ultimate question is, how do people deal with this whole certainty of adulterants or not, and how do we know? How do people?
Well, as a consumer, it's difficult to know.
Mhm.
We deal on a B2B level. We deal on a business to, as a nonprofit to the businesses, because that's where the rubber hits the road. We're the ones communicating to the people who are buying the raw materials, buying the extracts, putting them in capsules, putting them in a bottle, putting a label, and marketing them. It's hard, it's easier for us to communicate to them because it's a sophisticated conversation, and it's hard to get this conversation across to consumers. The fact is, there is some bad news. There's some good news as well, but let's be clear about it. First of all, this is a global issue. It's a global issue, and there's many good companies that care, that are run by people that are executives who care about the quality of their product and the company name, the quality of the ingredient that they're putting in their product, how they process it, and what the consumer experience is. The problem is there's people who don't care. They're just looking for the quick buck. That's the problem. And it's hard to know, separate the sheep from the goats. I'll just say one thing about that DNA test, by the way. I talked to the author of the DNA test that you're talking about, one of the ones you're talking about. And I said, there's no control here. How come you didn't control it? He said, well, it was going to cost us extra money. I said, why didn't you do chemical analysis just as a control? You could do HPLC or HPTLC, thin layer chromatography, high performance chromatography, and you can tell by the chemistry whether the plant chemistry that is going to be in that particular plant is there or not in the levels and ratio that it should be there, not just relying on this one black box DNA test. And he said, we didn't have the money. I said, how much would it have cost? He said about $10,000, which is pocket change. It cost millions of dollars of bad publicity, and companies lost a fortune on this thing for $10,000 and just some quick lab work. So this was part of the problem, but it's an issue. Look for companies that you trust. There's companies that also have third-party certification with third-party seals like USP, NSF, etc. And there's a lot of good companies out there. It's the good companies that are funding this program that I'm talking about. I mean, somebody's funding us to do it. It's the people who want to see this information. Patricia, thank you.
Thank you all for our future programs, and you can find them on our Flora Mania postcard, our website, social media. And again, thank you very much. Programs like this are paid for in part by members of the Lloyd Library. If you're a member, thank you. And if you're not, there are many ways to join: online, in person, by mail. Thanks again, and hope to see you next time.